Thank you. May we go with the first question?
I feel I might have a slight bias, having been in Washington and worked with the Republican National Committee at the time that President Ford lost. I can't help but wonder what your feelings are about the present economic position of the United States, in particular what your feelings are about Carter and his policies, and if they're maybe a little bit swayed coming from Georgia rather than somewhere else.
Well, I don't believe there is any fundamental difference between the policies of President Carter and the policies of President Ford. They both have adopted policies which are politically profitable. If we look, can you see, suppose you go back and look at the previous administrations, can you see any connection between the professed objectives of the people who sought office and what they did when they got into office? You know, every president of whatever party has the capacity, once elected, to rise above campaign promises. Here was Richard Nixon, a right-wing, free enterprise politician, very effective in his pre-election statements. Nobody in this country gave better speeches against price and wage control than Richard Nixon did. Nobody in this country was a stronger anti-communist than Richard Nixon was. Upon being elected as president, he makes a trip to China, an entente with communist China, and he proceeds to impose price and wage control. Here is his successor, Jerry Ford, a splendid congressman, a fine man, a man firmly in favor of a free enterprise system. As president, he signs a bill continuing price controls on oil. That's when he lost me. Now, so I say to you, I think that the issue is not a partisan issue. We will not solve our problem by electing the right people. We will only solve our problem by making it politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing.
How do you do? In light of pressures from the ecology and population, how should this alter the economic policies of our country?
We have spent the past 2 days driving across the Middle West, the empty spaces of Nebraska and of Wyoming, and I must say pressures of ecology and population were not very obvious to us as we drove across. I think there are real problems. There are no problems of population. The United States is an underpopulated country by the standards of almost any place in the world. Now, I'm not saying it's desirable to have a bigger population. I think that's a false issue so far as the United States is concerned. That what is desirable is to have a system under which parents, people who choose to have children, bear the costs and the full responsibilities of those children. And I think if we have a system of that kind, under which you do not artificially encourage population or artificially discourage population, why then you will tend to have about the right population. The figment of Malthusianism is very real in some parts of the world, but it has not been real in the advanced countries of the world. It has not been real in Great Britain, it has not been real in Japan, it has not been real in the United States. The rate of population growth in the United States has been slowing down, as you know. So I do not believe there is really a real problem of population. In fact, as you know, most of this country has fewer people per acre now than it did 100 years ago. People have voluntarily chosen to concentrate in large agglomerations in big cities. And then they complain that there are big cities. Now, the ecology problem, the problem of pollution and of maintaining clean water and clean air, that's a very real problem. That's not the same as a population problem, not at all. There, too, a large part of our problem arises from governmental measures that have had the opposite effects to those which are desired. Let me give you a very simple example right now. There's a big hue and cry about the steel industry and about imposing tariffs on, higher tariffs or import quotas on steel. Now, every ecologist in this country ought to be on the right side of that issue, which is a free trade issue. If Japan chooses to subsidize the export of clean air to the United States, why should we object? Isn't that what it's doing when it sends steel here? But here, we have this great hue and cry that we should somehow or other subsidize steel, either by tariffs or quotas or in other ways, to enable steel to produce both its product and its pollution at home. Now, personally, I'm just in favor of free trade. I want even rules. I don't want to give any subsidy to pollution. On the contrary, I would like to tax those activities that create pollution. But we're going about it in a very foolish and unwise fashion. We're going about it by trying to regulate the equipment which people use. And that's a very bad way to do it. Far better to impose an effluent tax and then leave it to the ingenuity of people to minimize the cost. So there is a real problem about pollution and ecology. It's not a growing problem. Make no mistake about it. The only reason we have so much more attention to ecology and pollution today than we did 50 or 75 years ago is that we're rich enough to be able to afford the luxury. The water is cleaner today and safer to drink than it was 100 years ago, not only in the United States but all over the world. The air is cleaner today. The automobile has been a source of less pollution, not more. Have you ever seen any calculations of what the streets of our big cities would look like if we were still using horses to pull things? So there is a real problem. And the fact that we are rich enough means that we should pay attention to that problem. We can afford to do something more about it than we did earlier. But we must not go down the haywire and create more myths that somehow or other we've been destroying an untroubled continent. You know, there are more acres of woods growing now than there were 100 years ago because it has been profitable to grow wood for lumber. The greatest protection of wildlife has not come from governmental measures to protect wildlife. It has come from the Audubon Society and from other private associations, and it has come, interestingly enough, from the people who are providing for profit private hunting preserves. This has given them an incentive to establish wildlife sanctuaries privately in Canada to preserve the source of the birds and so on which other people hunt. So all I'm saying to you is there's a real problem here, but put it in perspective. And don't think that the answer is always another governmental law which will restrict the freedom of people to use their own resources. Thank you. Can we have the next question?
All economists seem very rhetorical on history and things past. And based on present economic conditions, Doctor, I would like to impose on you as a revelator and seer, where do you think we are going as a nation in what time period?
Well, I will be glad to answer that. But the answer has to be divided into two parts. It's possible to state fairly clearly where we're going in the next year or two. But where we're going to go over a longer period than that is not written in the books. It's not foreordained. It depends on us. We are still masters of our own destiny. There is no determinism which dictated 5,000 years ago where we were going to be next year or the next 10 years. And so the question of what happens over the next 10, 20 years depends on whether the American people continue to move in the direction of bigger government and more government control, or whether we have a change in attitudes and beliefs, and we have a pressure on government to hold it down to size, to cut it back, to give more room for individual freedom. But now, so far as the next year or two is concerned, I'll be glad to respond, because there you can see pretty well what's in the pipeline. We are in the final, we are a little more than 2.5 years down the road of an expansion which started in March or April or May of 1975. On the average, over the post-war period, those expansions have lasted about 3.5 years. So we have about another year to go on the average. So for 1978, it ought to be a reasonably continued period of reasonably rapid growth in output. It is also a period when we will be facing increasing inflation. Inflation we can predict for a longer period than most other things, because inflation in any year tends to reflect monetary growth of 2 years earlier. For the next year or two, therefore, it's already more or less foreordained, as a result of the policies which the Federal Reserve and the Congress have been following, that inflation is going to be higher than it has been. Now, there was a temporary bulge in January and February as a result of the severe winter, and I'm not saying it'll necessarily be higher than that. But from December 1974 to from December 1975 to December 1976, inflation was at the rate of a little under 5% for consumer prices. That is, I think, the low point for a considerable period ahead. I think the rate of inflation over the next several years will average somewhere between 7 and 9%. Since interest rates tend to move up or down with inflation, I expect interest rates to be rising and to be higher than they are now. Of course, interest rates are extraordinarily low right now by any real terms, in any real terms. But to go along your line, that's more or less the prospect for the next 9 months in respect, or a year in respect of real output, for the next 2 years in respect to prices. What are the imponderables and uncertainties in that picture? Well, the first and most important imponderable, I believe, is the energy problem. It's, again, a case like the Great Depression. The energy problem is not a technical problem, it's not a physical problem, it's not a problem produced by private business. It's a problem which was produced primarily, you will be surprised to find, by Richard M. Nixon on August 15, 1971, when he imposed wage and price controls. And the only element of those wage and price controls that still exists of any significance is a control on the price of oil. If you had never had that wage and price control and never had the price of oil controlled, you would not be having any energy problem at all. You know, economists don't know much, but there's one thing we know very, very well, and that's how to produce shortages. Tell us what you want a shortage in. If you want a shortage in lettuce, we'll set a maximum legal price for lettuce below the price that prevails in the market, and I guarantee you, you'll have a shortage of lettuce. You want a shortage of housing? In New York City, we'll set a maximum price, rent control, a maximum price on rent, you'll have a shortage of housing. You want a shortage of funds available to borrow for mortgages? Just have a usury law that sets a maximum limit on the interest rate that may be charged. And if that usury law sets a limit below what would otherwise prevail in the market, you'll have a shortage of funds available for mortgages. In the same way, if you want to have the appearance of a shortage in oil, just set a maximum price on oil. Make it unprofitable for people to produce it. Make it profitable for people to use it. And what we have been doing in oil, as a result of that oil price control imposed on August 15, 1971, we have gone the standard natural route of government controls. We've gone from that price control to an allocation of oil. We have a program whereby we implicitly tax heavily domestic producers of oil and subsidize imports from abroad. You know, it's insane. Here we supposedly have a problem about our excessive imports from the OPEC countries, and yet we are following a policy which amounts to a subsidy of $3 a barrel on every barrel of oil imported from OPEC and other foreign countries. How silly can you be? All right, so now Mr. Carter has come out now with an energy program which would make all of this much worse. It's not a program for energy. It's another case of misleading labeling, of misleading advertising. It's a tax program. It's a major, major tax program, which would make the energy problem worse, not better. It would reduce the incentive to produce energy. It would lead to a wasteful use of energy. If that energy program were adopted, which fortunately it looks as if it will not be, then I might very well change the forecast I've been giving you. Then I might expect a recession to develop in 1978, and I might expect under those circumstances double-digit inflation by 1979. But as I say, fortunately, that program is not going to be adopted. However, unfortunately, a sensible program isn't going to be adopted either. We're going to continue, I'm afraid, with our present program, which will have the effect of sort of mildly hobbling us, supporting OPEC, enabling that cartel to last longer than it otherwise would. At any rate, what happens in that energy area is a major imponderable for the short term. Now, to go to the long-term prospect, that depends, as I say, entirely on what we do. If we continue down our present path, then if you want to see what's going to happen to us, just look at the history of Britain over the past 10 years. We've been following exactly the same path Britain has. We're about 15 years behind them. That is to say, about 15 years ago, the British government was spending the same fraction of their national income as our governments are now spending of ours. And that has produced, as you know, in Britain, inflation, financial difficulties, near collapse of the economy. Or if you don't want to go so far afield for an example, look at New York City. New York City is the most advanced welfare state community in the country. And that has produced in New York City increasing financial difficulties, an increasing loss of control by the citizens of New York over their own destiny. That's where we're headed if we keep on our present line. On the other hand, if we stop this and turn around and start going in the other way, this is a great country. We have great resources. We have an able, energetic, skillful people. We have lots of land. We have lots of know-how. There is no reason why we cannot continue on the path of increasing prosperity and increasing freedom that has characterized so much of our history. So I'm not going to predict which of these two paths we'll go down. Those are the alternatives. Thank you for your question. Let's have the next one.
Well, you touched on what I was going to ask on, and say as far as where we're going, say England, I was going to mention that. But I would like to ask, if we were able to turn this around, which I don't know if we'd be able to, do you think we could maintain a decent balance of payments? Not
the balance of payments is no problem. Again, that's only a problem of pricing. How do you get a balance of payments problem? The same way you get a problem in oil or in houses or in lettuce or wheat or anything else, by fixing the price. We had balance of payments problems so long as we had fixed exchange rates. The price, the relevant price in this case, is the exchange rate between the US dollar and other currencies. And we had balance of payments problems as long as we had a fixed exchange rate. Now, fortunately, this is a good thing that Mr. Nixon did on August 15th, 1971. You have to look at both sides. And the good thing he did was to close the gold window, to end the attempt by the U.S. to maintain a price of $35 an ounce on gold, which also had the effect of ending the fixed exchange rates between the dollar and other currencies. Now, so long as we have a freely floating exchange rate, there is nothing of less significance in the balance of payments. The market will fix it. If we are buying more goods abroad than people want to buy from us, then foreigners are accumulating dollars. Then what will they do with those dollars? They will try to buy their own currencies. In the process, they will bid the price of their own currencies up. The effect of that will be to make their goods more expensive to us, and our goods cheaper to them, and that will restore balance.
So what you're saying is that the problems are caused when governments go contrary to natural laws.
Well, no, let's not say that. Let's not put it that way. That makes it too easy, because we don't really know what these natural laws are. The problems are caused when government acts in a bad way, in a way that specifically distorts the incentives and the opportunities open to people, because there is a real room for government. We need government. We need government to do the right things. And now we have to examine and analyze what are the right things to do. We need government to protect one man from being hit over the head by another man. The great tragedy of the modern era and of the expansion of government, in my opinion, is that as government has increasingly been doing things it has no business doing, it's been doing the things it ought to do less well. So I'm not really willing to accept for the simple statement about natural law, because that leads you into the question of defining what natural laws you were talking about. Thank you. Let's have the next question.
My question deals with the point of using Madison Avenue tactics to ram...
Of what?
Madison Avenue tactics.
Yes.
To ram programs through people's throats. Surely, Dr. Friedman, those who claim no knowledge of economics, and indeed many economists too, listen to you. Why do they listen? Well, because there is faith in your knowledge and ability to analyze economic problems and launch an academic campaign. Suppose in the future, God forbid, you are found to be wrong. Surely, Dr. Friedman, does not the fault lay in our faith than in the decision makers? Does not the myth then grow out of the faith, the same faith we used to believe in you now?
Yes, it does. But there's a big difference. Quite a difference. See, I don't have any objection to Madison Avenue tactics. I think advertising serves a very useful function, so long as it's competitive. I think it's fine for me to be able to talk to you as long as other people can talk to you and you can hear other views and you can make up your mind. The thing I object to about government use of Madison Avenue tactics is that it is unrestrained and it doesn't have effective competition, and that it is financed, not voluntarily, not by the people who buy the product. That you and I have to pay taxes to hire people to persuade us to pay still more taxes. That's the feature of it that I object to. I have no objection to individuals in their private capacity getting up on platforms as I'm getting up on this one to try to persuade people to one view or another. But should the people you and I pay with taxes be in that position? Should we have employees of the Social Security Board sending around propaganda for extending Social Security? Is that an appropriate use of governmental money? I don't think so. And that's what I object to.
It is not. But aren't the people supposed to be intelligent enough to know deceit from truth?
No. They are supposed to be intelligent, excuse me, they are supposed to be intelligent enough to choose among alternative purveyors of supposed truth. The problem is a one-sidedness. We believe the whole justification for free press, for free speech, for our whole system of adversary justice, the whole justification is that people will be best able to distinguish truth from falsity if they have an opportunity to hear a variety of different opinions. Now, if you only have one opinion spoken, to shift grounds, if we go to the Soviet Union, the people in the Soviet Union are enormously skeptical about what they hear from their government. But they cannot know the truth because they don't hear it. They have to conjecture what is the truth because they only hear one side. They don't believe that. Don't misunderstand me. They become experts at reading between the lines. But they still don't have access to the full variety of opinion which would enable them to choose and decide intelligently and reasonably about what's right. So let's by all means have a clash of opinion. Let different beliefs clash in the marketplace of ideas. But let's not have a monopoly or a subsidization of one brand of ideas versus another. Let's see if we can get one more question in.
Yes, so you mentioned about the imports of steel.
Yes.
I'd like to allude to that. We hear from the American steel industry that in Japan, for instance, steel producers are producing at less than cost with support of the government so as to keep employment up there. And as a result, the American steel industry here is not going to be able to compete. So they're going to shut down and we're going to have higher unemployment here. What is your answer to that?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a very easy answer. Because I may say the answer I'm giving is not my answer. It was the answer that was given by Adam Smith, the man whose face appears on my tie, I may say. It was given by Adam Smith in 1776 in The Wealth of Nations. From that time to this, hardly any professional economist has believed in tariffs or protection or anything but free trade. But the answer is very straightforward. Let us suppose for a moment that the Japanese flood us with steel. That will reduce employment in the American steel industry, no doubt. However, it will increase employment elsewhere in America. We will pay for that steel with dollars. What will the Japanese do with the dollars they get for the steel? They aren't going to burn them. They aren't going to tear them up. If they would, that would be best of all. Because there's nothing we can produce more cheaply than green pieces of paper. And if they were willing to send us steel and just take back green pieces of paper, I can't imagine a better deal. But they're not going to do that. They're not stupid. They're smart people. They're going to use those dollars to buy goods and services. They're going to spend them. In the process of spending them, they may spend them directly in the United States, and that directly provides employment in the United States. They may spend them in Brazil or in Germany or in China or anywhere else. But whoever gets them in turn is going to spend them. So the dollars that we spend for the steel will find their way back to the U.S. as demand for U.S. goods and services. You will have less employment in the steel industry. You will have more employment in the industries producing the goods we export. Overall, total employment will not be affected. But overall, the American consumer will be benefited because he will get the steel more cheaply and the goods made from the steel more cheaply than he otherwise would. That's the benefit to the American consumer. Now, why is the steel industry and similar industries, why are they so effective in their campaigns for protection? Because of a very common problem that affects not only this but lots else, and that is the difference between the visible and the invisible. The people who are going to lose their jobs in steel are very visible. They're a collective group. You can name their names. Suppose we restrict imports from Japan. Then people are going to lose their jobs in these export industries. They will be widely spread over the country. You and I couldn't name one person. But that doesn't mean they're any less real. But the greater propaganda effect of the steel industry is because you can set the visible is a more potent political force than the invisible people who will lose their jobs. I urge on those people who think there's some sense to the steel industry argument to consider it in a more absurd setting. You very often bring out the logic of an argument by carrying it to an extreme. You know, you can have a great employment in the city of Logan, Utah, of people growing bananas in hothouses. If we had a high enough tariff on the import of bananas, it could become profitable to build hothouses and grow bananas in those hothouses. That would give employment. Would that be a sensible thing to do? If that isn't sensible, then neither is it sensible to artificially restrict the import of steel. Now, with respect to the charge that the Japanese government is subsidizing the export of steel, number one, is very dubious that it's true, but suppose it were true. Then that would be a foolish thing for the Japanese to do from their own point of view. But why should we object to their giving us foreign aid? We've given them quite a bit. Thank you.